Hello and welcome to Kingsgate Brief, the podcast series powered by Kingsgate Advisors Institute. This is the space where economics, policymakers, and thought leaders from Africa and across the globe come together to break down the big issues shaping our world. Each episode is designed to go beyond the surface, bringing you sharp insight, forward-looking analysis, and practical ideas for navigating both global trends and local reality. I am Ulambe Pelumi, the Executive Director of the Institute, and I'm your host for today's conversation. I'm very thrilled to welcome you and to have you join us for what promises to be another engaging and thought-provoking dialogue. And while you are here, I still want to encourage you, if you haven't yet, to subscribe to our YouTube page, follow our social media pages, and engage with all our previous episodes, and be the first to be informed when we drop our new episodes by hitting the subscribe button and also notification bell. And also, if you want to deep dive into what we do, you can visit our website, kingsgateinstitute.org, to explore some of the work we are doing within the Institute. Taking the conversation further, today's conversation basically centers on the recent wave of tax reforms in Nigeria, which marked one of the most ambitious attempts in recent years to shape the country's fiscal landscape. The reforms aimed is to broaden the tax base, improve compliance, simplify tax administration, and enhance revenue mobilization to meet critical development needs. Yet, history has shown that policy announcements alone are not enough. Effective implementation, stakeholders buy-in, and institutional capacity are very essential in translating reform intentions to actual and tangible economic outcomes. So today's conversation basically seeks to unpack what these reforms means to stakeholders, which includes individuals, businesses, and even government itself, and explore practical pathways to ensure that the policy vision becomes an economic reality. Why does it even matter? And why are we considering this today? Tax policy is very powerful. It's a powerful lever for economic transformation when effectively designed and implemented. It can fund infrastructure, it can support industrialization, and it can promote inclusive growth. However, Nigeria has faced persistent challenges in turning tax reform goals into measurable gains, often due to the combination of institutional problems, weak capacity, poor compliance culture, fragmented intergovernmental coordination, and limited public trust in government spending. Understanding the implication of these reforms and learning from both domestic and international experiences will be critical for Nigeria's future economic trajectory. So to take this conversation further today, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Professor Olateju Abiola Shomori, a distinguished scholar, accomplished professional, and a pioneering leader in the fields of taxation and fiscal policy. Professor Shomori is a member of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee. She is a professor of taxation at Caleb University, and she was the first female professor of taxation in Nigeria. Professor Shomori's academic and professional journey reflects a consistent record of excellence and groundbreaking achievements. She holds the distinction of being the first Nigerian to earn a master's in taxation, the first to receive a Doctor of Letters degree in Nigeria's tax system, and the first to be awarded a PhD in fiscal policy and taxation. Her accomplishments have set new benchmarks for experts, and leadership within Nigeria's fiscal policy landscape. Over the course of her career, Professor Shomori has combined academic rigor with practical impact. She has served as Associate Professor of Taxation and Fiscal Policy at Babcock University, where she played a pivotal role in establishing the institution's taxation program. She is also a fellow of multiple professional bodies. Her influence extends beyond the academia. Professor Shomori has advised the government, contributed to shaping tax legislation, advocated for fiscal reforms aimed at achieving transparency, equity, and economic development. Our leadership has advanced the role of taxation, and not merely in terms of revenue generation mechanism, but as a strategic instrument for sustainable national growth. Today, we have the privilege of engaging with a thought leader whose work continues to break research, policy, and practice. Professor Shomori, we are honored to welcome you and thanks for joining us on this conversation this evening. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Luaninde.
Okay, so going forward, at the end of this conversation, by the end of this conversation, listeners should gain a clear understanding of the scope and implications of Nigeria's tax reforms, insight into the practical challenges of translating policy into results, and an appreciation of the role of businesses, governments, government agencies, and even citizens in making reform work. Lastly, we are hoping that our listeners also at the end of today's conversation will have evidence-based perspective on how Nigeria can position its tax system as a driver of structural transformation and inclusive growth. So I will encourage you all to sit back and let's explore this conversation together. So Ma, I would like to start with this. From your perspective, and as a member of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform Committee, what are the core objectives of Nigeria's recent tax reforms, and how do they fit into the country's broader fiscal and economic strategy?
Thank you for your interest in the Nigerian tax system, the need to develop it to make sure that it can stand with any other country, globally. It's a very good decision that you are trying to do to explain the reforms, what is behind the reforms, and what people expect to gain or the benefits people are likely to see from the program. So your first question is the objectives. A lot of people feel that the objectives of reforms is just to grow revenue. Yes, that is a main objective in many countries, to grow tax revenue. In fact, the previous reforms that Nigeria has had, when I say previous reforms, I'm referring to the reforms of 1978. There was one initial reform in 1957-58. That was during the time of Ritzman Commission. After the one of 1957-58, there was another reform in 1978. We had another reform in 1991. We had another reform in year 2002, 2003. After that, we have all those reforms introduced by Finance Act. We have some reforms under Finance Act 2019, 2020, 2021. There wasn't any Tax Act in 2022, although there was a reform, but the bill that came out during the 2022 reform was not signed by the president. So let's just keep 2022 Finance Act. So we had that of 2023, 2024. Then this now the 2025, which started from 2023 and culminated in 2025. And the laws were signed by our president on the 26th of June, 2025. 4 tax bills were actually signed to become tax laws, acts. So we refer to them as NTA 2025, but not just one law. There are actually 4 laws put together into one. So the reforms, these current reforms that we have, is the reform that is 2 in 1. It's not just tax reforms. It combines tax reforms with fiscal reforms. So the 2 are together, spending and income, not just only income side and the spending side of the reform. So the 2 are together. So one of the objectives is to increase the tax to GDP ratio because it has been said, and there's a data to prove it. If you remember, the chairman of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, has said it so many times. He has a lot of data. There are data to prove it, that the tax to GDP ratio of Nigeria is one of the lowest, in the world. And there is need to grow that tax to GDP ratio, because when you have a high tax to GDP ratio, it will naturally grow the economy, that the economic growth and development in the country. So one of the objectives, I don't want to start with tax revenue, because that is not the main focus of this particular one. So that's why I'm starting with economic growth, because when the economy grows, then everybody will benefit when you have a very buoyant economy. So that's why I'm starting from there. So one of the objectives is to grow the tax to GDP ratio from what it used to be, which was about 8.6 or so, to 18.1 or 18.6 by next year. So that is one of the objectives. Then another objective of this particular reform is pro-poor in the people, in the sense that is a focus on the poor people. A lot of people are suffering. They cannot feed properly. They cannot live in good houses. They don't have access to health, health facility. If they go to the hospital, even to pay for ordinary consultation, it becomes a problem for the poor people. And if the poor people are not helped, they cannot grow. And if a family is poor, it will naturally translate to the children of that family. The children too will be poor, and at the end of the day, everything will go on like that, and it will affect the whole nation. So there is need to concentrate on the poor people, so that the poor too can breathe, the poor can then also grow. So that is another objective of this reform. Then the other objective of this reform is to look at the economic side, to look at banking reforms, to look at CBN, issue of foreign exchange, dollars, oil and gas, engineering, use of digitalization. Many countries, they have actually, improved. They have gone to using digitalization. Rwanda, Estonia, Singapore, there are so many countries that are going that way. AI, in many countries are already using AI. So when you grow your country with use of data, using machinery, using so many information and data, there are so many things that will happen to the tax system of that country. You'll be able to block all the loopholes where people use for the use of tax evasion. You block those areas so that a lot of revenue will come in, and that country will be buoyant, the country will grow, everybody will be happy. So those are some of the reforms. Then the other one is also to translate many of our tax laws. Many of our tax laws are fragmented. Before this reform, there is, I will say use is, because we are still using them. For every tax, there is a separate law. So let me take it this way. For companies income tax, there is a separate legislation called Companies Income Tax Act. CITA is the acronym. CITA Cap 16, LFN, Laws of Federation of Nigeria, 2004. All the laws that we have now, they are all laws of Federation of Nigeria. So for companies income tax, you have a separate legislation called CITA, Companies Income Tax Act. For personal income tax, we also have a different legislation called PITA, Personal Income Tax Act. For capital gains tax, there's a separate law as well, which is called CGTA, Capital Gains Tax Act. So like that, education tax, there's a separate law. All those things like that, all the taxes that we have separate laws guiding them, and they are scattered in different statutes. So if you want to, let's use the example of rate of tax, for example. If you want the rate of tax for companies income tax, you go to a separate legislation to look for it. You go to section 40 of CITA to get the rate of tax for companies income tax. If you want the rate of tax for capital gains, you have to go to another law, as I mentioned, which is Capital Gains Tax Act, you get the rate there. So you have to go to all these different laws to get answer, just one answer. The one answer is what is the rate of taxes in Nigeria. So you can't use one legislation just like that to answer this simple question. So all these different piecemeal legislation, they are now put together under one act, which is called, the acronym of that one is NTA, Nigerian Tax Act. So you have all of them together. So if you want any information on income, profits, or gains, you will go to that law. You have that information there. If you want information on offenses and penalties, we go to another legislation, which is NTA, Nigerian Tax Administration Act. So that is the kind of things that this reform is out to do for the poor, to protect the poor, to make sure that the poor can breathe, for the economy to grow, then the legislation itself. Then also the objective is to ensure that the laws are simplified in that the ambiguity in the existing laws, the ambiguities have been removed as much as possible, such that they are now easy to read. Anybody that takes the laws now the way they are, you will understand it. You don't have to be an economist, you don't have to be an accountant or a lawyer or a tax administrator to understand the laws the way they are now. They have put them together, they have been simplified. Then the purpose of this reform is also to let people understand why they are taking this, why the reforms is necessary. Because if people don't understand what a policy is about, people are likely to go against it. So let me stop there for about objectives of the tax reform, or the tax and fiscal reform. So don't forget, it's not only to grow revenue, it's part of it, but it is more than growing revenue. Eventually, all the what has been put in place will eventually grow the revenue, but that is not the main focus. The main focus is to make sure that Nigeria is one of the countries that can compete with countries globally, then to also ease means of doing business so easy, because right now a lot of business people, especially the small scale people, they have a lot of issues getting along. They can't no access to funds and things like that. So this reform is also to address that. In fact, it's a holistic kind of reform. We have never had this kind of reform before in Nigeria, because it has touched every facet of the economy. There's nobody that is not touched. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much for that rich perspective. That's a very good and a very great to start the conversation. And thanks for bringing that clarity as to see why this reform and why it's important in terms of the simplification of the process, the clarification, and also the unification of the NTA, that's the Nigerian Tax Act. That's good. But I want to also, and the fact that you've also brought it further is not just for revenue generation in that sense. So it's good to know that. I want us to dive in a little deeper. And I want to ask that in your experience as a veteran tax experience in tax related policy and the likes, why do well-intentioned tax reforms often fail to achieve their desired impact in Nigeria? You mentioned when you started, at the introduction of your response, how we've had different reforms over the decades at different times, and but the question is, why have we not seen the intention of these reforms on the Nigerian economy? Why has it failed at achieving those reforms? And why is this different? I want us to just shed a little more light to that, and also in comparison to other economies. Why do we experience that?
Okay, so it's like to do a comparative of the reforms that has happened before to what we have now. Like, what are we doing differently that they didn't do in the past, and why they have not succeeded? Maybe something like that. I think that's a question. Okay, so maybe I should take the reforms one by one. So let's start with the one of 1957. The reform of 1957-1958, that started under Sir Jeremy Reisman. You see, each reform, they have their objective, the reason why they are set up. Although ultimately, nearly all the reforms from my experience in Nigerian tax system since 1976 till date, nearly all the reforms, there is none that the focus is not generation of revenue. Do you understand? That is always that generation of revenue is always there. The one of 1957, that of 1957, Nigeria was not the Nigerian that we have now. It was under the colonial period. So that one was to just look at the challenges in the system, in the tax system as at that time. Because the challenges, let me just say one of the challenges, because there are many. One of the challenges at that time is about revenue. So that reform under Sir Jeremy Risman concentrated mostly on the issue of revenue, how to share revenue. So that was during that time that they made so many recommendations that we're even still using now. And some of these recommendations of Sir Jeremy Risman, they found their way in the Constitution of 1961. And one of the outcomes of that reform is what we are having now, because that time there was only one tax law. So at that time, they felt there was a need to have separate tax laws. So the outcome of the 1957-58 tax reform of Sir Jeremy Risman, one of the outcomes was that we have what we called that time, CITA 61, Companies Income Tax Act 1961. It was the outcome of that tax reform that led to CITA 1961. So that tax reform achieved one of its objectives. And one of the objectives was that there should be separate, tax laws. That's why should we be having only one law? And that law that time was not the way we have it now. They were using something called Native Revenue Ordinance. Ordinance simply means law. So that achieved its objective, and also about revenue, allocation of revenue. It achieved its objective. In fact, some of the objectives of that tax reform, they are still using it in revenue mobilization, allocation, and fiscal commission today. It was the outcome of that 1957. So that's a very, very long time. So let's leave 57 alone. Let's now look to that of 1978. That of 78 was put up under the period of a military. Many of them were under the military. So that of 1978 was under the military. So the purpose of that one was mainly focused on revenue generation. What was on revenue generation, so that there will be less dependence on crude oil. And that was that of 1917. That was why that was brought on. Each tax reform, anytime there's a tax reform, there is always an outcome. One, in most cases, a new law will come out. There'll be a new law that will come out. In most cases, rates of tax may be increased, it may be reduced. That is also a pattern in many of the tax reforms that we have had. So that of 1978 was mainly based on generation of revenue, fighting of tax evasion. And in order to do that, one significant outcome of the 1978 tax reform was the introduction of withholding tax. The withholding tax that was introduced in 1979 as a result of that tax reform, we still have that withholding tax. We still have it in our tax laws as we speak today, but they have been amended severally. But it's the same thing that that was introduced in 1978 that we still have in our tax laws. So that of 1978 also met its own objective, and the objective was to curb tax evasion. And withholding tax has actually curbed tax evasion. That is why up till now we have not dumped it. Even when a study group recommended that the withholding tax regime should be abandoned, we didn't abandon it because Nigerian government has seen the beauty in using withholding tax, because it's a deduction at source. When somebody makes business, the businessman, immediately you get your money, it will be deducted at the source. It's similar to pay as you earn, which is like a source of deduction. The government takes its own before the owner gets all. So that is what the withholding tax is, just about. So that of 1978 also achieved its purpose. So that of 1978 it didn't focus on the things that these ones are focusing on. I talked about the issue of tax to GDP. The terminology tax to GDP ratio has never been used in all the tax reforms that I've studied, starting from that of Sir Jeremy Reisman of 1957, the one of 1978, 1990, all the ones I've mentioned. There wasn't this focus on tax to GDP ratio. There wasn't this focus on use of digitalization, using of, right now, under this reform, there's e-invoicing that has just been introduced by the Federal Inland Revenue Service, which will soon be changed into Nigerian Revenue Service. E-invoicing is not there. So they have different focus. Each of the reforms, they have different focus. And as I said, the previous reforms, they were just purely tax reforms. They were not fiscal tax reforms. So the reforms that we're having right now is actually expanded. It's a big lot of reforms focusing on so many areas of the economy. So it's different from the previous one. So the previous one, they had a focus. They said, so let me quickly move to that of 1991. The 1991 too, it has its own. Now the one of 1978, 1979, the recommendations, not all the recommendations were implemented. So one of the problems why we have failure in previous tax reforms is that, after a tax reform, there's usually a report. In the report will contain so many recommendations that if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. We have recommendations in the tax reforms. Few of the reforms that we have had before, they usually have problem when it comes to implementation. It's either not to implement fully or not to implement at all. There are some of the recommendations were not implemented at all. For example, the one of 1978, one of the recommendations was that in Federal Inland Revenue Department, the FRS that we have today is not FRS. The name FRS that you hear today, the name LRS that you hear today, the name SRS that you have today, they are all born out of reforms. They were recommendations, that born out of reforms. The 1991 tax reforms, of which I have the privilege of being the secretary. I was the secretary to that tax reform of the 1991. It was this particular reform that ushered in value-added tax into Nigeria, because one of the terms of reference, anytime they set up a study group to study the system, to make recommendations and so on, they always have terms of reference. Terms of reference were used for the 1978 reform. It was used for the 1991 reform. It was used for the 2002, 2003 reforms. But we didn't choose terms of reference for this one. Rather than use terms of reference, we used another word that gives it the same objective and outcome, which is objectives. What are the objectives? And then it talks about implementation. So some of the previous tax reforms, some of them fail when it comes to implementation. The 1991 tax reform, one of the recommendations was that all the tax authorities in Nigeria should become autonomous, that all of them should become autonomous. And, we have, apart from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, we have other tax authorities, one at each state. We have a Lagos State Tax Authority, Kano State Tax Authority, all the states like that, they have each have their tax authorities. So one of the recommendations at that time under the 1991 was that all of them should become autonomous. But that recommendation was not implemented fully. Even at FRS, it was not implemented fully until 2007, when the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act number 13 was enacted. It was then that Federal Inland Revenue Service became fully autonomous. So what I'm saying is that one of the problems that we had that time is implementation. And that is what this particular one, the 2023-2025, wanted to avoid. They wanted to make sure that we are not going to just do the reforms report and give the report to the president and say, Mr. President, they hear your report and say bye-bye and go away. That is not that. They stayed back because they are still taking part, they are playing a role in the implementation, I mean the 2023-2025. Since it was inaugurated, it was inaugurated on, I think, August 8, 2023. Since the inauguration, I think Mr. President has told Mr. Oyedele that you have to be part of the implementation because it will work. Because if you say Mr. A should formulate reforms, make recommendations, Mr. A packs his load, he goes away. We now go and call Mr. B, Mr. and Mrs. C and D to come and implement what they didn't take part in recommending. So that, it brings in a lot of problem. But this one is not like that. And this one is holistic in the sense that nearly every facet of the economy, they took part in this one. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, they were there, and stakeholders were there, the academia were there. They invited all sorts of people at different times. The committee, they went around, having conversations with all of them, how this reform would work. So that is that one. Then the one that I also said that in some cases, the implementation may be half or not done at all. Under the 2002-2003 tax reform, one of the recommendations was that we should establish an office of tax simplification. That was one of the recommendations of the 2002-2003 Office of Tax Simplification. Up till now, I don't think that has been done. We have not put up an Office of Tax Simplification. But I can say that under this 2023-2025 reform, that has been taken care of. But an office known as Office of Tax Simplification, OTS, as they did in UK, we didn't, that was not carried out. Then the National Tax Policy document was one of the outcomes of the 2002-2003 reform. The 2002-2003 reform happened under the administration of Dr. Okonjo-Iweala as the coordinating minister of the nation that time. So the report was submitted, quite voluminous. I took part in getting that together because I was working in FRS that time to produce the report of the National Tax Policy. After that was done, the report was just kept somewhere in the office of the minister. The recommendations were not carried out until when Mrs. Kemi Adeosun came on board, also as a coordinating minister of finance. It was then when she came up, she now set up another committee. You can see wastage of government funds. One committee did the work, the reports were submitted, the recommendations were not carried out. So they had to set up another committee under Professor Abiola Sani. So Professor Abiola Sani and his team now looked at what was done before. So they now worked on that one under Dr. Okonjo-Iweala and brought out a simplified version of the National Tax Policy. Even that simplified version of the National Tax Policy is also being worked upon now. It's also being worked upon to renew it and to make it perfect. So these are the kind of the problems that we usually have when the reform has taken place before and it didn't work. So why it didn't work is what I'm saying out there. It's not holistic. There are some things that needed to be done that were not done. Then in the previous reforms, they didn't focus on looking at making things digital. So things were usually done manually. And when you run a process manually, you leave room for a lot of imperfections. There'll be loopholes for people there'll be tax evasion, so many bad practices will be there. But when you bring automation into it, it is not easy. So all those malpractices, automation would stop it, and we have verifiable data that you can look upon to make a case for whatever you want to do. So in fact, what I'm saying is that there are so many things that happened in the past that they didn't look at what the current ones, what they are doing, that is making it perfect, because I can see a perfect tax system with this 2023-2024. I can see a perfect system for Nigeria because It is holistic. It's as if every loophole, every gap that we had before, every gap has been covered in this present one. So let me stop there for that and then discuss further. So,
Thank you very much. I really like how how you concluded the answer to this question. And I like that you were able to you also clearly stated that for this particular 2023-2025 tax reform is different from what we had in the decades. And the fact that implementation is also embedded in the entire reform.
yes.
So it's not just yes, it's not enough for you to just create a reform. You see through the process of implementation. And we are really optimistic to see once the reform kicks off next year, we want to see the impact and want to see the desirable change in the fiscal space. Thank you for that. I mean, and you've really touched on some of the lessons to learn from the previous. I was supposed to be my next question. Anyway, you touched on the lessons we can learn from the previous reforms so that we avoid that right now. But I want us to go straight into impact of all of these reforms, what impact it will have. And I want to start with businesses. What should businesses, both large and small business, what should they expect in terms of compliance requirements, in terms of incentives, and even in competitiveness under this new tax framework? What is it? What is in it for them as an incentive, and what has changed from what it was before, basically for businesses, business owners?
So for businesses, the question is what businesses should expect from the reforms. So I will take the question this way. Before businesses can expect anything from the reform, what has been laid down for the reforms, that is, what businesses have been asked to do, they should comply. That's number one. They should comply. Because if they don't comply, they're not likely to see the benefits. So, like businesses, whether big or small, they all need to file returns. First of all, before even going to filing of returns, they must register. The business must first of all register with the CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, under CAMA 2020. If a company is not registered under CAMA 2020, you are not recognized as a business. So even you cannot even grow into a large one. And if you start as a large company, whether small or large, the tax authorities, they will not recognize you as a company. So first of all, you must register as a company in whichever category you decide to fall into. You register with CAC. After registration, you also register. That's another area of compliance. You register with the Federal Revenue Service, which will later become NRS. You register with that one. When you register, you also register and get your TIN, taxpayer identification number. Then you file returns. So for all these stages, there are some requirements. So all businesses, they should follow all the requirements. So when they follow the requirements, we can now move to what they can get. I think the question is what businesses can get from the reforms. So when they follow all the requirements, businesses, let me start with the small businesses. There are some exemption for the small businesses. So the exemption for the small businesses is that government want them to grow. They don't want them to die. Because small businesses, they usually have problem of funds. And when a business does not have funds, that business is not likely to grow. So what will make them grow are some of the things that we already have in the tax reforms. So what the small businesses should expect from the tax reforms is that they should expect growth. They'll be happy. They expect growth because the environment will make them to grow. For example, the small businesses, they are exempted from payment of some taxes. They will not pay when they have a turnover 100 million and below. Small businesses, they will not pay companies income tax. That likewise, capital gains tax, they will not pay that as well. Then there are some incentives that have been, programmed into the tax system that will make them grow. Then there will also be accessibility for funds for them, and the money they are able to recover from the savings because of these exemptions that they are going to enjoy, they'll be able to plow that money back into their business. and their business will grow. So for the big companies, fortunately in Nigeria, many of the big companies, they are complying. The big companies many of them are complying. For example, the e-invoicing that has just been introduced by the Federal Inland Revenue Service by big companies. Big companies are those that have 50 billion annual turnover. All of them, they have to log on onto the platform of FRS for the e-invoicing. I think they need to do everything and complete it by 1st of November this year. So the big companies, they're already enjoying many of the benefits. They will continue to enjoy the benefits, and the environment has been made conducive, not only for the small companies, but also for the big companies, because the big companies now, they will enjoy the use of technology in whatever they are doing. They will enjoy technology. All those carrying about papers here and there to go to Federal Revenue Service to argue their case, that will not be necessary again. Then under these reforms, there's another law called the Joint Revenue Service Board. Under that board, you also have the tax appeal. The tax appeal is there, and the Office of Tax Ombud. So if they have any kind of disputes, any kind of complaints, that can be taken to the Office of the Tax Ombud, so that the issue of taking cases to, although there be still legal issues, but some of these issues can be resolved by the Tax Ombud when they take it there. Then also the Tax Appeal Tribunal is now streamlined, is more organized than when it was before. And the time spent on arguing about disputes, it will be reduced. So that is that one for the big companies. Then there are so many incentives for the big companies, whether it is agricultural or tech companies, whatever type of industry they find themselves. The incentives are so many. They can't be going through the incentives now, but there are incentives there in the law for all the big companies that they can take advantage, they can take the advantage of to actually grow their businesses. So that is that. Any other, you mentioned incentives, Which other one did you mention? Which other one
Yes,
did you
so
mention?
visually is the incentive and also the benefit. And I think you've touched on that the compliance also you touched on that. So
The compliance, as you've mentioned, because compliance, why it is important for them to make sure they take compliance very seriously is that under the Nigerian Tax Administration Act, NTAA, the penalties, they are very huge now, even up to, I think, 10 million for a kind of offense. Whereas before these reforms, we have small penalties recommended, like 20,000, 10,000. All the penalties, they have really gone up now, up to 1 million. So for failure to file returns, failure to declare honestly, failure to keep books of accounts, all those ones, because, when penalty is very stringent and very high, people are likely to comply. So when they fear that, if I don't comply, this is the penalty, people will now see that it is cheaper, it's economical to comply with what the tax law says than to say, before, people would prefer to pay the penalty rather than to comply. Because if the penalty for something is just 5,000, 10,000, you say, how much is it? It's just 10,000. Let me just pay the 10,000. Let's take an example of people when you drive on the wrong side of the road. If you are caught and you know that the penalty is just 50 naira, people will break that law and pay the penalty rather than obeying. But now, with what we have under the new tax reforms, it is reasonable for you to comply with the laws than to, first of all, break the law and pay the penalty. Because if a company that is not strong, if you pay the penalty once, the company may even die completely. It may not see the light of day again. So it is better for businesses to comply, whether small, big, whatever they are. It's better for them to comply. And then they need to study the laws. Then the other advantage of these reforms is that they are, and the people that are working in the reforms, they make sure that people are carried along. I think that is also an important one. People are carried along. They are taught what to do. In fact, recently, the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, they started some series. I think they are on the 10th series. They are now serializing everything in the tax acts. They are serializing it. They are focusing on different aspects of the tax reforms, and they've been rubbing webinars on it. And all the members of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, I think they're over 30,000 now. They all link up to that webinar. From there, they are learning a lot about this so that they will know, they won't run foul of the laws. They will know what they're supposed to do and what not they're supposed to do. So tax education is also very key. And that is one of the things that was lacking in the previous tax reforms. Tax education, carrying people along, translating the laws into different languages, maybe Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, so that people would understand this, and going to the grassroots of the local governments to make sure that everybody comes on board come January 1st, 2026, so that nobody will be left behind. You won't say, I've never had. So it's similar to what Nigeria did when VAT was being introduced in 1993, whereby Nigeria did a lot of campaign. There were so many campaigns, flyers all over. When you go to the airport that time, as you are alighting from the plane, they will give you flyers so that everybody knew that something was happening in Nigeria. So the same thing is happening now, even more detailed than what happened when VAT was coming on board in 1991, 1992. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that as well. And I like that it's driving down the point that it's important to comply than to pay the penalty. And that's very important and instructive to businesses and even taxpayers generally. That right now the reforms in such a way that cheaper, so to speak, for you to comply
Yes, it's
than
true.
for you to pay the penalty. And that's really good. And also the benefits are there, but you need to be rightly positioned, as businesses. Make sure your books are in order. Make sure that your filing is up to date, so that you can have the full benefit of the encouragement. So it's just generally beyond, like you said, beyond revenue generation and improving the tax base for the government. Is helping in terms of structuring businesses, compliance generally, and just to do the right thing. So it's really encompassing. So the next question I want to ask is like a flip of this question, because people are wondering, if I become compliant and I pay my tax up to date, I do my filing, I do all that. What is the assurance that from the government side they will be accountable, they will be transparent? How important is transparency and accountability in government spending? Because we know that this is a source of revenue, in fact, a major source of revenue for the government. How sure are we that they will spend our money well in code? In terms of government spending for improving compliance from the taxpayer side and also just public acceptance of the entire reform. What are the um, what are the things, pointers that will indicate to the general public, to taxpayers, that government, they are spending your money well, they'll be transparent with this reform, and there'll be an accountability system wherein you are sure that though I'm an up and doing citizen in terms of my responsibility when it comes to tax payment and all. And government is also up and doing in terms of challenging these resources to the actual and optimal use.
Thank you very much for that question. I've been expecting that would come, because when government has gotten the revenue, so how will the Nigerians, how will they benefit? That, okay, you've asked us to comply, we have complied, we have paid our taxes. How are we sure we are going to use this tax well? That's a very good question. Accountability and transparency, the two, they go together. You can't take one from the other, because if you're a transparent person, you'll be accountable. From small things, you'll be accountable. If somebody gives you 10,000, go to the market, buy XYZ for me. When you come back, you will give accounts of how you spent that 10,000. That means you are transparent in your dealings. So what government has done or is doing now to make sure that it is accountable so that people can see, because it is important for people to see. Because when you go to other countries, you can see that tax money is working everywhere. So that is what we want to happen in Nigeria now. We want people to be visible. How they spend the money, we want people to see it. But if you notice, since Mr. President and President Tinubu came on board, we have seen a lot of improvements, what we are not seeing before. Even take it from LRS, from Lagos State. From Lagos State, so many things. There's hardly any part of Lagos State that you go through now that you won't see road construction. Even when you open your WhatsApp, you will see some messages on the WhatsApp that roads, this side of the bridge is bad. This was not happening before. This side of the bridge is bad, and we're going to close it for about a period of 6 weeks. Work will start on so day. The bridge will be open on so day. That is tax revenue working, and they are carrying people along. So that is a way of seeing people, of letting people know how they are spending that money. All over Lagos State now, you can see tax money that is working everywhere. Then go to Federal Capital Territory. When you go to Federal Capital Territory, since the current minister, Wike, got there, in fact, Abuja has changed. It has changed a lot. We see that tax revenue money is working. Look at the airports, the international airports, the one in Lagos and also the one in Abuja. That's tax money working. So many things are being done now. Then the loans for students that they just put on board, that is tax money working. And not only that you are seeing all those things. To answer your question, that how would they know? What will the reform do? Part of what the reform has set up to do is under the national tax policy. You remember I mentioned that the national tax policy is also being worked upon. When it is finalized under the national tax policy, there are going to be policies about budgeting, how to spend money, how much to allocate to this, how much to allocate to infrastructure, how much to allocate to education, how much to allocate to hospital. All those things, they are evolving. All those things will happen. Then don't forget that I didn't mention this. Let me quickly chip this one in now. Nigeria used to have too many taxes. On paper, I think there were about 66. When I say on paper, that is according to the law, there is a law called Taxes and Levies Approved List Tax Collection Act. I think it has been repealed now. That law had about 66 taxes that Nigerians should pay. But outside that 66 that you have on paper, Nigerians all over the country, they are paying well over 100 taxes, which gives rise to what we refer to as multiple taxes. All these multiple taxes, they are going there. Very soon they'll be dead. Because instead of people paying all these different small taxes, what they will now be paying is something called levy. There'll be a development levy, one levy that they'll be paying. And even the money from that levy, they are going to divide them into different sectors of the economy. Part of it, maybe 50% will go to tertiary education. Some will go to cyber something. Some will go to Naseni. There are about 8 agencies. They have their own percentage. And all those money, they are all from the tax revenue. So that is how that one will be spent. But a policy document is in the offing. It will soon come out about what you just mentioned, that how will people know, how people will see it. So when that comes out eventually, you'll be able to see clearly that is, in terms of budgeting, government is now very serious. That for education, this is how much you spend on education. Roads, this is how much you spend on roads. Health, this is how much you spend on health. So all that one is now coming up. So this is a very serious government. It's not like how it used to be before, that they're just talking, nothing is going to happen. This time around, things are already happening. You yourself, you know it, that things are already happening. And just give this reform, give it a chance. During when it starts to implement and it starts to unfold, all of us will see it, that there are benefits in these reforms, the fiscal reforms as well as the tax reforms. So your question is that the new national tax policy that is coming on board, that will be the third one. The first one was in 2012 under Dr. Okonjo-Iweala. Then it was reviewed under Mrs. Kemi Adeosun. That was in 2016, 2017. But under this present reform, the national tax policy is also being rebranded. So it is under that one that you are going to see policy statements about budgeting, how they are going to spend the money, then the penalties that will probably go with if you spend, government money recklessly. That will be there. Then don't forget that the fact that we are now using digitalization with all the things that we are doing, the way people are, just spending government money before recklessly without being checked and without being detected, it is now going to be more difficult than before. So that is how we take that question. Thank you.
Brilliant, very brilliant response there. So I personally look forward to the policy document when it's out. I believe it will be made publicly available so that we can all see what we expect, and we have that's to boost confidence in what the impact of the reforms, and to be sure that indeed, though we are compliant as taxpayers, as businesses, the government is also doing its own part of showing transparency and accountability. So we look forward to that. The conversation is really getting interesting, and we're also drawing to the close of the conversation. But as we conclude now, I think I'll just like to round up with this 3-in-1 question just to save time. We can attempt these 2 questions together. And the first would be to know how this reform, if well implemented, how will it reshape Nigeria's economic structure over the next decade? What are the forecasts as to the fiscal space, the impact on the economy in terms of economic transformation, and if maybe structural change? What will be the impact in the next decade? Because I believe reforms like this is intended to have a long-term impact. The second is to also see how we can learn from other countries, especially maybe within the global south countries, how we can learn in also improving the entire tax policy framework and design, so that this reforms, so the impact of this reform that we are hoping to see in the next decade will indeed be achievable. So how you can attempt these 2 questions.
Okay, thank you very much. The questions are quite loaded. We are talking about now. We're also talking about future, and we also want to talk about sustainability, because that is very important so that we don't go back to what used to happen before. So I can foresee that these reforms we continue to enjoy the benefit for the next 10, 20 years. Because as I said before, when we started this conversation, I said that the reforms are holistic. I would even say that there is no stone that we have left unturned, because it has turned every facet of the economy. I can see our economy growing well, our tax to GDP ratio becoming very close to what we have in the OECD countries. In the OECD countries, they have their tax to GDP ratio as high as 30, 31, 33. Our own now, which is I think 11 point something, is still a far cry. But as we move on, I'm optimistic that our tax to GDP ratio will grow. And then Nigerians will see that with all those penalties that they have put in place, they will now know, everybody will sit up. They will know that Nigeria is no longer business as usual, that these reforms, we want it to work. And you and I, we should all put hands together to make sure it works. We have to work as a team. Then if you look at the income tax band that is there now, from 0 to 25%, all those earning 800,000 per annum, the income tax band has put them under 0. They won't be paying anything. I mean, that is good news for those people that fall into that category, and there are quite many. So those that will really be paying taxes on the long run are the people in the upper bracket, and there are not many. So all those ones, those we regard to as high net worth individuals, those are the ones that will actually be paying the high taxes. And even the high taxes that we're talking about, they won't feel it, because if you compare what you have put in our income tax band, which is the highest is 25%, is not as high as what you have in some countries. Some countries have up to even maybe 40%, and our own is just 25%. So the economy will still grow. Then talking about other countries, even with this reform, we're already borrowing from other countries what they are doing, because the e-invoicing, we borrowed it from some countries that are already doing it. And then the chairman of the Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, Mr. Oridele, has done some studies on some of these countries, like Rwanda, like Kenya. Is always mentioning, if you have listened to him a number of times, you see that he's always talking about Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa. Those are in Africa. They are not in another continent. They are within the African continent, and they are doing it right. So why can't we do it right? So we have borrowed from them, and you will see that many of the positive changes that are coming on board, we have already borrowed them. And as things evolve, we still continue to borrow the good ones that they are doing to also grow our economy. So gradually, Nigerians will come to learn that we mean business this time around. There was a time during the presidency, I think it was late Buhari and then Idiagbon, when they introduced Operation Y, War Against Indiscipline. That period, everybody was conscious. If you go on the streets, at the bus stop, you see people, they queue. In the banks, people will queue, because there are not even many banks as at that time. We didn't have many branches. So the few branches that we had that time, First Bank, UBA, Union, I think those were the foremost banks that we had in Nigeria at that time. Later on, that we are having the likes of Guarantee and Zenith. So the few banks that we have in Nigeria at that time, there was discipline. At the bus stop, there was discipline. People, they kept to Operation Y. But immediately, that regime was no longer there. People went back to what they were doing before. So I would say that Nigerians should learn to have a stable government. We should learn to have a stable government, because stability in governance is also very, very important. Because if President A believes in these reforms, and the tenure of President A comes to an end, and President B does not believe in these reforms, that will take us back. So all of us, we should put hands together. We should all work to make sure this reform works. Whoever is there as the president, let us know that the current president did not put the reforms there for his own benefit. It's for the benefit of all the Nigerians, for those that are yet to be born, the children that are yet to be born. Look at this loan scheme that is there. The children are yet to be born. They will take benefits of this loan. Look at the issue of VAT sharing formula that has been an issue for quite a long time. Why do we have that problem of VAT sharing? It's a pitfall of some of the recommendation of the reforms that were not carried out. The recommendation under Professor Dr. Phillips in 2002, 2003 was that value-added tax should be in the exclusive legislative list. That was not carried out. So we should learn that when there are recommendations in a tax reform by a study group, and we all buy that recommendation, we know it is a positive recommendation, we should all work together to make sure that the recommendation is carried. Because if a recommendation is made and it is not implemented, so implementation is very key. So we should learn to implement all the good recommendations. Everybody should work together, support this government, so that everybody will benefit. When even this thing started, some people, they were saying all sorts of things without even reading the bills. They didn't know that what is in the bills is for their own benefit. They didn't read it. They were just saying something different entirely. So everybody should learn to read what we have in the tax acts. They are no longer bill. They've come out as tax act. Everybody should learn it because they should read it. Because when you read it, you will understand what you are supposed to do and what you are not supposed to do. And when what we have borrowed from other countries, like in Rwanda, as I mentioned, South Africa, and then Kenya and other countries that were not even in South African continent that are good, we should embrace it holistically. We should work together and know that the tax reform or the fiscal reforms that we have now is not only about, that is my final words. Our reforms are two-in-one reforms, the fiscal and the tax reform. Is not only about generating revenue, it's about making Nigeria a smarter place, making Nigeria to be first among equals, to be able to stand with all those countries among the OECD countries, they'll be able to stand among the Committee of Nations. This kind of reform is out to deal with tax evasion. It's the kind of reform that is to protect the poor. It's the kind of reform that wants to grow the businesses of the small, medium companies to make sure that they grow. Is a kind of reform that is pro-investment, like some of the recommendations we have under the chargeable gains, under the Capital Gains Tax Act, whereby there's some benefits for you for reinvesting whatever gains that you make in selling your shares. The benefits are just too many. Everybody is out to gain from these reforms. You are there to gain. I that I'm speaking to you, I'm there to gain. Those that have big monies that are not paying their own share of tax before, they will now pay their correct share of tax. And when they pay their correct share of tax, they will see that whatever they have paid, no matter how substantial it is, they will see that this government is determined to make sure that their tax money will work. It's not just about growing revenue, it's more than growing revenue. So let us put hands together and make sure that Nigeria works for all of us again. I'm ready to pay my part. What about you?
I am ready to do my part as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
A good way to conclude the
Brilliant.
conversation. Thank you so much, Ma.
Thank you.
This is a good place to conclude, but if you can just quickly do this in 1 or 2 minutes, in fact, in 1 or 2 sentences, I'm sure people will be curious out there what the role of state and local governments are in this entire conversation. What role do they play in ensuring that this reforms is implemented in each state and in each tier of the government? How do what are the specific responsibilities, in all this for the state and the local government in like a minute or two? We'd like to take
Okay.
take
That's a good question. We shouldn't leave it out because it is true that we have not spoken about the states and the local governments, and we have to make it a rounded conversation. So we need to talk about the states and the local government. Nigerian has its own structure. It's a 3-layered structure. We have the federal government, we have the states, which we now refer to as subnational, and we have the local government. So at the highest echelon is the federal government, followed by the state government and the local government. So at the state government, each state will ensure that they see to their own states and make sure that everything works in their states. Whatever allocation that they get from the VAT sharing formula, from the federal government, whatever they get, they should make sure that it is translated into improvements of their states, particularly infrastructure, good roads, water for everybody, education, health sector. They should do that in their states. Then at the local government, the federal government cannot oversee everybody. So federal government will oversee some, the state will oversee some. Then at the grassroots, the local government will have 764. That's quite a large one. And they are all divided into different states. So each local government, they also have their responsibilities. Even now, there is a local government revenue committee that are to see to the issue of collection of taxes at that level. So what each sphere of government, they have their responsibilities defined in the law and also in the constitution. Let everybody just do what is right. What the local government is supposed to do, how to spend the revenue, let them spend the revenue wisely. Let the states to spend the revenue wisely, and the federal too. They should spend the revenue wisely, and they should ensure that the people within their domain, they should ensure that they pay their fair share of taxes, and where they don't pay their share of taxes, where they don't comply, they should ensure that all the penalties already put in place, the penalties are enforced, because it is the administrators that will work on ensuring that the penalties are enforced, because the penalty, if you just put it in the law, the penalty cannot enforce itself. It's the administrators that will do it. So those that we have at each of these structures that I've mentioned, the three structures, they have their defined roles and responsibilities. Let everyone do what he's supposed to do, as far as the law is concerned, so that everybody will be happy. Nigeria will become stronger and stronger, and then the reforms in that sense will be sustained. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. This is a good time and this is a good point to conclude today's podcast. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts and your insights with us, particularly as touching the tax reform. It's very instrumental and very important that a member of the committee gives us perspective and helps us to see the entire intention of the government and the likely impact of this reform, not just on businesses and individuals, but even on government itself in terms of transparency and accountability, and for businesses in terms of compliance is now very important for us to all comply, to be up and standing citizens that want to always do our due responsibility in terms of paying tax. I look forward to the full implementation. I look forward to the impact on the macros, on the fundamentals, but particularly within the fiscal space. I look forward to seeing a significant transformation within the fiscal space in terms of the tax base, the revenue, and the likes. And I also look forward to seeing the economic transformation that happens afterwards in terms of using these funds for capital projects that are able to improve lives and livelihood. Like you said, as we're conversing, a long-term
And the forex.
agenda. Yes, so we look forward to seeing that. So thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you very much, my dear.
Our viewers, we encourage you to interact with this series, this particular series. Please comment. Let's hear your view. What are the things that stood out for you? What clarity did you gain within this conversation? And if there's any other related topic that you want us to touch base on, you can also identify and comment within the comment section. Continue to engage with us. We'll come again next time with another insightful, thought-provoking, and a way of translating economic jargon into a practicable and actionable use for our viewers. Thank you all for staying, and thank you all for viewing today's episode. We'll see you again next time. Have a good evening. Bye.